You won't believe this. In villages miles from city lights where internet used to mean waiting hours for a picture message, Indian telecom towers are going up faster than you think. Airtel, with roots in India, now connects millions in Nigeria, Uganda, Zambia, and Indian-built digital ID platforms are being lifted whole cloth in two African capitals, all without big flashy headlines. Meanwhile, American tech giants the names we're used to are slipping behind, their deals stall, their influence wanes. What if the digital map of Africa is being redrawn quietly, not with noise, but with lines of fiber, satellite links, tower steel? To understand why India is winning this race and how the US is getting pushed aside, you'll need to see what comes next. India didn't start this overnight. They built something called Digital Public Infrastructure (DPI), identity systems, payment systems, rapid data platforms, think Aadhaar, think UPI, billions of people, digital IDs, instant payments. Now this model is being offered to African nations, open source, scalable, cheap to adapt. Countries don't have to reinvent the wheel. They plug into platforms that have already been tested with millions. The US tried something similar in parts of Africa, but often with strings, intellectual property restrictions, higher prices, licensing headaches. This DPI model gives India leverage not just in tech but in policy influence. Once you build the ID system, control payments, manage data exchange, you've built power. And we'll see later how that power creates silent dependencies, you know, those metal towers you see pushing up on hilltops, outskirts, rural areas. India's Indus Towers, part of Bharti Airtel, is now planting them in Nigeria, Uganda, Zambia. These are passive infrastructure, the backbone. Without them, data doesn't travel, calls drop, internet slow or non-existent. Compare that with US involvement, usually through massive corporations, often tied with big investment or security deals. But building towers in remote African counties, slow permits, security concerns, cost burdens makes it hard. India's advantage, it sees the towers, sees telecom penetration as a business opportunity, not just a geopolitical tool. This infrastructure presence sets up something bigger, control. Once towers exist and are managed by India-based providers, those networks become part of India's reach. And coming up next, how India is also winning hearts and regulations via training and local talent. It's not only steel and fiber. India is pouring into local capacity building. Training programs, ICT skill hubs, technical universities in Africa are partnering with Indian institutions. For instance, digital transformation approaches via India help African professionals to master managing networks, cybersecurity, e-governance. Why? Does that matter? Because local expertise buys legitimacy. When governments see that their people know how to run their systems, India becomes not just a provider, but a partner. The US, for all its funding and tech exports, sometimes doesn't invest at that level of grassroots skills development. That gap gives India both soft power and staying power. But there's a danger. When regulation and oversight are still weak, who controls the code, data flows, and policy? That's where influence actually sticks. Here's where things get tricky. As Africa's internet footprint grows, questions about who holds the data, how regulations are shaped, where privacy standards are set become huge. India has promoted open-source identity platforms and data exchange architectures like MOSIP, Aadhaar-informed structures. Some African nations are adopting them, or parts of them. Meanwhile, the US pushes for strong intellectual property protections, data localization in its own preferred forms, and sometimes demands stricter controls over cross-border data flows. Those demands often make contracts expensive, slow to negotiate, or less appealing. So nations that want fast deployment, lower cost, easier negotiation often lean toward India's models. Regulatory design may seem boring, but it's here where future profits, digital sovereignty, and who owns the internet in Africa are decided. Next, we'll examine cybersecurity, vulnerabilities, and why some Africans worry that this rapid spread could invite risk. More internet means more targets, more IoT devices, more traffic, more cross-border data. A study found that many African countries, South Africa, Nigeria, Tunisia, Morocco, Egypt, are especially vulnerable to cyber attacks due to open ports and weak regulatory environments. India promises secure frameworks, but scaling fast sometimes means skipping steps, local oversight, audit, transparency. Meanwhile, the US has long claimed moral high ground on cybersecurity, pushing secure supply chains, privacy, etc. But its models are also expensive, complex, and often controversial. Data privacy, surveillance concerns, etc. So some African governments find Indian tech options more accessible, more flexible, and perhaps more adaptable to local context. But adaptability can come with risk. If regulations lag or oversight is weak, dependency on external providers, even well-intentioned ones, may expose nations to backdoors, data misuse, or external political pressure. Coming up, we'll look at how all this shifts power, economic, political, and where the US might yet fight back. Where is the US in all this? It's not out of the game. US firms do major cloud services, satellite internet, venture capital investments in African tech startups, but there are obstacles: regulatory and diplomatic red tape, cost structures higher than many Indian offerings, public perception. Sometimes deals are tied to political strings. The US has begun pushing back through summits, through funding cybersecurity grants, through trying to set international norms around digital trade, but India often offers something faster, cheaper, lower friction. One move: India's Indus Tower's expansion into Africa challenges US tower infrastructure companies. Another move: India's DPI export digital ID payment platforms gives it policy influence from behind the scenes. So the question becomes, can the US adapt to compete on speed, cost, and on soft power appeal? We'll get to that soon. By now you see the pattern. India isn't bargaining with noise. It's building quietly, but deeply through infrastructure, platforms, skills, and regulatory norms. The advantage isn't just having the tech, it's getting embedded. The US, once default leader in digital influence, now sometimes looks like the one struggling to keep up, not for lack of resources but because speed, accessibility, and trust matter more than ever in the digital age. The digital future of Africa is being shaped now. Who controls the towers? Who holds the IDs? Whose models become policy? Those are the silent levers of tomorrow's power. In the end, the one who builds the map, not just the roads, controls the journey. But here's the twist most people don't see. Africa isn't just a prize in this contest, it's a player with agency. Countries like Nigeria, Kenya, and Ethiopia are learning to balance India's low-cost, high-speed offers against America's prestige and security. Promises. Leaders are asking themselves, do we choose the path of affordability and independence, or the path of global alignment with Washington's standards? This balancing act might define Africa's entire digital future. A future where the continent is no longer just a customer but a maker, exporting its own tech talent, creating its own platforms, and setting its own digital rules. And here's the real question that will decide it all. Will Africa use India's momentum as a stepping stone to true digital sovereignty, or will it simply trade one dependency for another? Because if history has taught us anything, it's this: control of the wires, the codes, and the platforms isn't just about technology. It's about who gets to write the rules of tomorrow. And in that story, the quiet contest between India and the US is only the opening chapter. Africa itself will decide how the ending is written.